Chapter 7 Eating Out. Annie kept smiling at the gorillas. Wow, she said. Wow, wow, wow. Didn't you know you were sleeping next to them? Jack asked. No, she said. When you didn't come back, Boo Boo led me here. But I couldn't see anything. It was too dark. Just then, Boo Boo left her mother's arms, and bounded over to Annie. She climbed into Annie's lap and hugged her. Another small gorilla left his mother and ran over to Annie too. He was about the size of a 2-year-old kid. Ho, ho, he said. He gave Annie a playful poke. Ho, ho yourself, said Annie. Is Ho, ho your name? She tickled Ho, ho. She tickled Boo Boo too. The two gorillas made laughing sounds and fell into their backs. The two mother gorillas laughed too. They said. Jack felt a little jealous. He wanted the gorillas to like him as well, but he didn't know how to join in the fun. So he just sighed and pulled out his notebook. He added to his gorilla behavior list. Suddenly, he heard a low growl. He looked up. The silverback had moved closer to him. He was glaring. That big guy doesn't understand what you're doing, Annie called to Jack. He's never seen anyone take notes before. Jack quickly put his notebook away. The giant gorilla huffed, and then he turned to his family and gave a short bark. The gorillas began lining up behind the silverback. The baby traveled in the mother's arms. Ho-Ho traveled on his mother's back. Boo-Boo and Annie held hands, and they all followed the silverback out of the clearing. Come on, Annie called to Jack. Let's go with the big guy and the gang. Jack shook his head. I don't think they want me to come along, he said. Boo-Boo screeched at Jack. She held out her free hand to him. Boo-Boo wants you, said Annie. Jack smiled shyly. He took Boo-Boo's small, warm hand, and then he walked with Annie and the gorillas out of the clearing. On their ramble through the cloud forest, the gorillas found food everywhere. They munched flowers and ferns and leaves. They swallowed and burped. They munched twigs and branches and pieces of bark and bamboo. They swallowed and burped. As the gorillas ate breakfast, it started to rain again, but they didn't seem to mind. Annie didn't seem to mind either. She and Boo-Boo played tag in the drizzly woods. They ran around the trees, laughing and screeching. Jack tried to follow them, but he gave up. He was tired and cold. Shivering, he stood under the moss tree to keep dry. While he was alone, Jack sneaked his notebook out of his pack. He made a new list. Gorilla foods: flowers, ferns, leaves, twigs, bark, branches, bamboo. As he wrote, he heard a low growl. He looked up. The big guy had spotted him. The silverback was standing close by. He was frowning at Jack, his lips tucked in a tight line. Sorry, sorry, said Jack. He quickly put away his notebook. Big guy kept frowning. Jack quickly tried to act like a gorilla. He went down on all fours. He tore off a leaf of a plant. He took a bite. It tasted bitter, like vinegar. Jack pretended to munch and swallow and burp. The big guy huffed, then moved on. As soon as he was gone, Jack spat out the leaf. Yuck, 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 he said, wiping his tongue. Jack felt a tap on his back. He jumped, but it was just Ho-Ho. The small gorilla offered him a twig to eat. Oh, no thanks, Ho-Ho, said Jack. Ho-Ho kept holding out the twig. Oh, okay, said Jack, politely taking it. I'll eat it later. He put the twig into his backpack. Ho-Ho's mom came over to Jack. She held some berries to his lips. No thanks, said Jack. The gorilla stared at him with a sad look. Oh, okay, said Jack. He opened his mouth and Ho-Ho's mom fed him the berries. Jack munched the berries. To his surprise, they tasted good. He swallowed, then burped, just like a gorilla. This time he wasn't pretending. Boo Boo's mom then came over to Jack. She offered him some rainwater from the cupped plant. Jack was thirsty. He sipped the water, and it tasted fresh. Boo Boo's mom took Jack's hand in her wide hand. She led him through the forest to Annie and Boo Boo. Boo Boo screeched happily when she saw Jack. She threw her furry arms around him. "Hi, we miss you," Annie said to Jack. "Are you having fun?" Jack smiled and nodded. Actually, he was having fun now. He didn't mind the rain so much anymore. He didn't feel so left out. Some of the gorillas really seemed to like him, he thought. They seemed to like him a lot. Chapter 8. A Special Language. The rain ended. Slowly, the feeding came to a stop. Big Guy led his family into a clearing. The tall grass sparkled with misty sunlight. The silverback lay down and tucked his arms under his head. The other gorillas gathered around him. Some beat the grasses until they were flat. Ho-Ho's mom made a bed of weed stalks for Ho-Ho. Boo-Boo's mom made a bed of leaves for Boo-Boo. And then she made 2 extra beds for Jack and Annie. They lay down with all the gorillas to take their naps. Jack used his backpack for a pillow. Lying on his leafy bed, Jack watched the mother of the baby gorilla groom her small baby. The mother parted his hair and searched through it, picking at the skin now and then. The baby soon wiggled free and crawled around in the grass. His mother's gaze then rested on Annie. She moved over to Annie and gently grabbed one of her pigtails. She studied it carefully. "What are you doing?" Annie asked. "She's looking for bugs, I think," said Jack. "Oh, yuck," said Annie, sitting up. Jack laughed. Just then, the baby's mother reached for him. "Oops, no thanks, no bugs on me," he said. And then he sat up too. The mother gorilla lay back in the grass and closed her eyes. Her baby crawled over to Annie. "Hi, little guy," Annie said tenderly. She picked up the baby and stroked his head. The baby smiled at her and closed his eyes. While all the gorillas napped, Jack sneaked the book out of his pack. He found the gorilla chapter, and he read softly to Annie. "Gorillas are smart. A captive gorilla named Coco has even learned sign language. Sign language is a special language used by people who cannot hear. Coco can say—" "What?" Annie said loudly. "Sign language? A special language?" Her voice woke Boo Boo and Ho-Ho. They sat up and rubbed their eyes. "So?" said Jack. "Morgan's secret rhyme," said Annie. "Don't you remember?" She repeated the rhyme. "To find a special kind of magic in worlds so far apart, speak a special language, talk with your hands and heart." "Oh, yeah," said Jack. "I even know a little sign language," said Annie. "In school, we learn how to sign, 'I love you.'" Annie held up a closed hand. Slowly, she lifted her thumb, index finger, and little finger. She showed the sign to Boo Boo and Ho-Ho. "I love you," she said slowly. The small gorillas looked curious. Jack made the sign too. "I love you," he said to Boo Boo and Ho-Ho. The 2 little gorillas stared at Annie and Jack. Then both of them held up their hands. They tried to make the same sign. "They love us too," said Annie. "Wow," said Jack. He glanced over at Big Guy. The silverback's eyes were open. He was watching them. Jack quickly closed the book, and to his relief, the giant gorilla turned over. "Well," Annie said with a sigh, "I guess that does it." "We spoke a special language," said Jack. "We talked with our—" But before he could finish the sentence, Boo Boo pushed him. "Whoa," said Jack. Ho-Ho held his little arms over his head. He reared back at Jack, and with a flying tackle, he knocked Jack over. "What's going on?" said Jack. "They want to play with you," said Annie. Boo Boo jumped on Jack and put it on a headlock. Jack broke free from the small gorillas. He jumped up and dashed into the forest. Boo Boo and Ho Ho charged after him. Annie carried Little Guy and followed. She laughed as the small gorillas looked for Jack. Jack hid behind a tree. He pushed his glasses into place, and he waited for Boo Boo. In a moment, she walked by. "Boo!" Jack shouted, jumping up. Boo Boo screeched and leaped straight up into the air. Jack cracked up laughing. Boo Boo didn't laugh, though. She bit her lip. She hid her face behind her hands. "Oh, Boo Boo," said Annie, "don't be scared." She gently put the baby on the ground. She reached out to comfort Boo Boo. Boo Boo wrapped her arms around Annie's neck, and she buried her furry head in Annie's shoulder. "Jack was just playing," said Annie. Boo Boo raised her head. She looked at Jack over Annie's shoulder. "Friends?" he said softly. Boo Boo stuck her tongue out at him. Jack laughed. Boo Boo showed her teeth in a big smile. "Friends," said Jack. Just then, Ho-Ho started screeching. Jack and Annie looked around. Ho-Ho was pointing into the bushes. "Where's Little Guy?" said Annie. She and Jack dashed around the shrubs. The baby had crawled to a tree. He was looking up at a branch. A huge, sleek cat with black fur was sitting on the branch. His pale green eyes stared down at the baby gorilla. He looked hungry. "A black leopard," breathed Jack. The leopard leaped down from his perch. He faced Little Guy. The baby looked scared. "No!" cried Annie. She ran over to the baby gorilla and scooped her up into her arms. The leopard let out a snarl. He lowered his head and started towards Annie and the baby. Jack panicked. He didn't know what to do at first. Then he remembered Big Guy's act. Jack took a deep breath, and then he let it out. He made a loud hooting sound. He tore out from the brush, hooting like a silverback, and he ran between Annie and the leopard. Jack grabbed a tree limb and shook it. He ripped leaves from branches. He cupped his hands. He beat his chest. "Roar!" he roared. "Roar!" And then Jack leaned over and charged back and forth past the leopard. Finally, he threw himself on his belly, and he began bashing the ground with his palms. He bashed and bashed and bashed. "Jack!" Annie called. "Jack!" Jack stood up. "He's gone," Annie said in a quiet voice. "The leopard's gone. He left a while ago." "Oh," said Jack. He sat up. He pushed his glasses into place, and he looked around, and then he smiled. Chapter 9. Goodbye, Gorillas. Jack couldn't stop smiling. He had scared off a leopard. Boo Boo and Ho-Ho stared at Jack with awe. Annie looked at him with awe, too. "When did you learn to do that?" she asked. Before Jack could answer, he heard a rustling in the brush, and then Big Guy stepped out from the shrubs. The giant gorilla walked silently over to Annie. He took Little Guy from her and put the baby on his back, and then he touched Annie's cheek gently. Annie grinned at him. Boo Boo and Ho-Ho ran to Big Guy and clung to his legs. The giant gorilla barked at the small ones, directing them to come to him. As he walked past Jack, Big Guy stopped. "Ugh, ugh, ugh," he said in a low voice. He reached out towards Jack. Jack just ducked. But the silverback patted him on the head, and then he and the small gorillas moved out of sight. Jack felt as if the top of his head were glowing. "Wow," he whispered. "Did you see what he just did?" "Yeah," said Annie. "He must have watched the show you put on. He was proud of you." "Well, he was proud of you too," Jack said modestly. Annie nodded, smiling. "I guess it's time to leave now," she said. "Leave?" said Jack. "We have to say goodbye now," said Annie. "Goodbye?" said Jack. He didn't want to say goodbye to the gorillas. He loved them, and they were totally great. Yeah, Annie said softly. Come on. She led the way back through the shrubs, around the trees to the clearing. They found all the gorillas awake. Some were stretching and yawning. Others were munching on grass or leaves. The baby was back in his mother's arms. Boo Boo and Ho Ho were chattering away to their moms. They're probably telling them what I did, Jack thought. He and Annie walked over to Big Guy and stood in front of him. The other gorillas gathered around. We have to go now, Annie said to all of them. We have to say goodbye, said Jack. Thanks for letting us be a part of your family, said Annie. So she and Jack held up their hands and waved. The gorillas looked sad. They murmured soft sounds. Big Eye lifted his hand in the air as if he were about to wave, but instead the silverback raised his thumb, his index finger, and his little finger. I love you, the gorilla signed. Jack couldn't believe his eyes. Annie signed back, I love you. Jack signed too. The silverback stared at them for a long moment with a gentle look, and then turned away and gave a short bark to his family. All the gorillas lined up behind him. The baby's mother held her baby close. Ho-Ho rode piggyback on his mom. Boo-Boo held her mom's hand. The silverback started away from the clearing. The others followed. Boo-Boo was the only one who looked back. She screeched and waved at Jack and Annie, and then she walked away, out of sight. Jack couldn't talk. His heart was too full. He took a few steps in the direction of the gorillas. Hey, Annie said softly. You're going the wrong way. Jack looked back at her. The treehouse is over there, she said. She pointed in the opposite direction. At the treehouse peeking out from the fog. Jack sighed, and then he turned and started to follow her out of the clearing. Oh, don't forget this, said Annie. She leaned over and picked up Jack's backpack from the grass. She handed it to him. Thanks, he said, and they kept walking. And don't forget this, said Annie. She picked up Jack's jacket from under the tree. She handed it to him. Thanks, said Jack. He tied his jacket around his waist, and they kept walking. And don't forget these, said Annie. She pointed to the flashlight and umbrella. They lay in the grass under the wide, mossy limbs of the fat tree. Annie picked them up and carried them herself. It started to drizzle again just as she and Jack got to the rope ladder. They climbed up into the treehouse. When they got inside, they looked out the window. Jack hoped to catch one last glimpse of the gorilla family, but there was nothing to see. A white mist covered the cloud forest. Annie picked up the Pennsylvania book, and she pointed to a picture of Frog Creek Woods. I wish we could go home, she said. Suddenly, a joyous screech rang out. The happy wild shot through the white mist, through the cool rain, strayed into Jack's heart. He opened his mouth to answer the call of the gorillas, but it was too late. The wind began to blow. The treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster. Then everything was still. Absolutely still. Chapter 10. A Special Magic. Tap, tap, tap. Jack opened his eyes. The Frog Creek woods were still dark and rainy. We're home, Annie said. Jack sighed. I missed them already, he said. Me too, said Annie. Did you take a lot of notes on their habits and behavior? Jack shrugged. I listed a few things about them, he said, but sometimes lists just don't tell you much. You have to love gorillas to really know them. Yeah, that's right, said Annie. Jack opened his backpack. He pulled out the research book and put it in the corner. Then he pulled out a twig that Ho-Ho had given him. He smiled as he showed it to Annie. I promised Ho-Ho I'd eat this later, he said, but I think that we should save it for Morgan instead. Good idea, said Annie. It'll prove to her that we found the special magic. Yeah, gorilla magic, said Jack. The magic of all animals, said Annie. Yeah, said Jack. He placed the twig next to the scrolls they brought back from old England. Let go, said Annie. She started bound. Jack pulled on his backpack. He put the flashlight in his pack, and then he grabbed the umbrella and followed Annie. They started through the Frog Creek woods. It was still cool and dark and rainy. Jack didn't mind, though. He didn't put on his jacket. He didn't take out the flashlight. He didn't put up the umbrella. Jack felt as if he weren't completely human yet. There was still a bit of gorilla left in him. Ooh, 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 he said in a low voice. Boo, boo, Annie said back. They said together. The end. That was it. I hope you enjoyed it, boys and girls. Here's just more facts for Jack and Annie and you, real quick. Gorillas are the biggest members of the group of animals we call primates. Other primates include chimpanzees, orangutans, gibbons, baboons, monkeys, and humans. All gorillas live in Africa. There are 3 groups of gorillas: western lowland gorillas, eastern lowland gorillas, and mountain gorillas. Mountain gorillas are the largest gorillas. They have longer hair and longer jaws and teeth than the lowland gorillas. Mountain gorillas live in the volcanic mountains of Virunga in East Central Africa. The word Virunga means a lonely mountain that reaches to the clouds. Gorillas are mainly herbivores or plant eaters. They keep on the move so that they will not deplete a feeding area. A silverback gorilla can eat up to 50 pounds of forest vegetation in only one day. 50 pounds, that's a lot. Well, I hope you enjoyed this, boys and girls. Again, endangered species, and I think we talked about what endangered species are. All gorillas are on the endangered species list below, but the ones most threatened are the mountain gorillas. Fewer than 650 still live in the wild. None live in captivity. A woman named Dian Fossey lived for almost 20 years with the mountain gorillas. During her life, she fought very hard for their protection. And I'll leave this for you to read. You can pause. Talks about the American Sign Language and gorillas. And starting next week, Magic Treehouse book number 27, Thanksgiving on Thursday.